Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. I'll get to Australia in a moment and hopefully also Ukraine. There's some positive news in that conflict for Ukraine through the use of drones. But I'll start with the Strait of Hormuz, the topic of the day, and whether it's open or closed, I have no idea. Negotiations supposedly are going on between the US and Iran, but the story keeps on changing almost hourly. Whether a deal is imminent or whether more time is needed, we simply don't know, because I suspect on the United States the people involved are largely incompetent, and the Iranians are not known either for their reasonableness in these things. And remember, this was the war that our government initially cheered on, though more recently I see they've been expressing a bit of buyer's regret. But given the short attention spans and the rapid news cycles, when people complain about high fuel prices, this situation, the causes of it were initially endorsed by our government, and the position of the coalition, of course, was even more extreme. Let's have a quick look at how those war aims are going. A popular uprising in Iran? Nope. The extreme hardline Islamic leadership is even more extreme now, so I can't see how the long-suffering people of Iran benefit from that. Destruction of Iran's nuclear weapons capability, I thought that occurred last year in the 12-day bombing campaign, but it doesn't matter because the program has been set back, not destroyed. Iran remains in possession of enriched uranium. Who knows what the fate of that is going to be? Iran's ballistic missile program has undoubtedly been set back, but not by as much as we were told. Now, there's nothing funny about any of this, but I noticed that part of the US and Israeli plot, bizarrely, was to try and install Iran's virulent anti-US, anti-Israel former President Mohammed Ahmadinejad as the supreme leader of the country. I know this sounds bizarre, but it's credible reporting out of the United States. Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama, so there's a bit of political bias there, I guess, said, it's a degree of incompetence that should be really, really alarming to people. I couldn't agree more with that. Is Cuba next? Some form of military operation involving special forces to seize 94-year-old retired President Raul Castro seems to be underway, and I ask everyone, is this normal? Does Australia want to be associated with this sort of behaviour? What else is happening? The US hasn't given up its interest in Greenland. There's been a bit of activity there that I might detail in a future podcast. Canada, a further setback in relations there, with the US having just suspended what's called the US-Canadian Permanent Joint Board of Defence, created back in 1940. And this suspension has been driven by none other than Elbridge Colby, the bureaucrat who I keep mentioning as a key AUKUS figure, and he is demanding that Canada and all NATO countries lift defence spending to 3.5% of GDP and another 1.5% on top of that for defence infrastructure or national infrastructure related to defence. And also the US is again applying pressure on Canada to buy all 88 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters that they were initially looking like buying, until Trump started going on about turning Canada into the 51st state. More on that to come as well. In the last episode, I mentioned that 4,000 US troops were no longer going to be rotated through Poland, a decision of US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, who believes that wars are won by steroidal men. Anyway, he's been overruled by President Trump, who, by the way, has a similar belief set about winning wars, but wants to be nice to the new Polish president, who has said nice things about him. So the cancellation has been cancelled, and the troops will be going to Poland. How the Chinese and Russians must be laughing at this continuing incompetence. But here, Australian military planners and Defence Minister Richard Marles presumably believe that Trump is playing eighth-dimensional chess and knows exactly what he's doing. On the local scene, well, big news with the Collins Life of Type extension effectively being cancelled. Now, I'll start with some words about a speech that Richard Marles gave to the LOTE Institute. And frankly, that was, I think, last Tuesday. And I felt embarrassed by large slabs of it because he spent a lot of time attacking the coalition. Now, Labor is in its second term. The fourth anniversary of the 22 election win was actually on Saturday, and yet our Defence Minister is still seeking to blame the coalition for all of the problems with the defence portfolio. I mean, why stop there? Why not blame the First Fleet? I suppose ultimately Adam and Eve can be blamed for all of Labor's problems, but what's the point of doing that? Now, strangely, the speech, possibly the most insultingly partisan I have heard, and that's saying a lot, doesn't appear on the minister's website, but it's online, and I have a copy. Now, I say this more in sorrow than in anger, but when I combine this with his frankly very strange speech at the National Press Club, which I talked about, namely, proof that the international rules-based order still exists is provided by the behaviour of Indonesian fishing boats respecting the maritime boundary with Australia, itself a falsehood, that these are no longer the words of a rational person. Anyway, the speech to the LOTE Institute in Melbourne was a series of excuses about why the Collins-class submarines will not receive across the fleet a common life of type extension, but will now receive ad hoc repairs and maintenance based on an assessment of each individual submarine for the rest of their long lives. This is a critical issue for Australia because further descoping of the Collins upgrade or update program means that we are in real trouble if the promised nuclear-powered submarines do not start arriving on time from the US in 2032. And as regular readers know, I am doubtful that will happen on time. And by the way, I'm just going to digress briefly by saying I get a lot of pushback about that along the lines when I express my skepticism about the ability of the US to deliver. People say, but the Australian alliance is so important to the US, they would never do anything to jeopardize it. Namely, they will transfer submarines to us if that detracts from their own capabilities. Now, apart from the fact that that would go against US legislation, but you have to wonder about the logic of that. Would the US do anything to jeopardize the relationship with Australia? Well, why wouldn't they? I mean, we're an important piece of real estate to them. But I think the reality is that even if, as I expect, the US keeps deferring the sale of nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, I don't think they'll cancel it outright. I think they will keep stringing us along. What are the spineless Australians going to do? I'll tell you what. We will do nothing at all. The same people currently running AUKUS, or rather their replacements, as the current lot retire, they will just keep telling Australians that the alliance is fine. None of our current politicians or military leaders would ever have the spine to say to the US, no submarines? Well, in that case, the alliance is finished. That's just not going to happen. We will eat it up. And also, since our cash donations to the US and UK industrial bases, $10 billion worth, have no refund clauses, we have no leverage. Zero. Donald Trump must be laughing at the stupidity of it all. If there was a refund clause, That's a stick we could wave. No submarines, then we want our $5 billion back. But we can't do that because our so-called negotiators have done an appalling job not in the national interest. Anyway, back to the present. So it's hardly surprising that Minister Marles wanted to put his own spin on the Collins program because his speech took place 3 days before an absolutely devastating ANAO report was released into the program. It's online. I recommend that everyone read it, anyone who is seriously interested in this topic, because it is one of the most critical reports I have ever read into defence conduct or misconduct, mismanagement. The overall summary is, well, there will be no upgrade program as such. Each submarine will be assessed individually. The estimate for LOTE was between $4 to $6 billion. By the way, that always struck me as being on the low side. But the cost of this de-scoped approach is estimated to be $11 billion. How is this possible? Getting so much less for so much more. Just one quick qualifier, at least the sensors have kept pace through a separate program through C1448, but I'm talking about the hull. So the ANO, the quick summary, it says, as the fleet ages, the LOTE is required to maintain submarine capability and availability until Australia transitions to a future nuclear-powered submarine. Without a service life extension, these submarines would be withdrawn from service between 2026 now and 2036. The ANAO says, Defence adopted a delivery strategy that involved major redesign and replacement of key submarine systems using common equipment, suppliers and technologies selected for the former attack-class submarine program to reduce risks in that program. This decision significantly increased the technical complexity and risk profile of the LOTE project. When the attack-class submarine was cancelled in 2021, Defence did not reassess the LOTE delivery approach or present government with alternate options. The risks associated with this approach have now been realised. Costs have grown, delays have accumulated, and the scope of the project has been reduced. The ANAO continues. Alignment of the Collins LOTE with the attack class program was adopted without robust options analysis or a comprehensive risk assessment. This effectively foreclosed consideration of alternate delivery strategies and constrained advice to government at key decision points. Subsequent reviews found the decision to align the LOTE with the attack class program transferred significant design, schedule, and integration risks to the project. When the attack class program was cancelled, the rationale for the alignment strategy no longer held. Defence did not systematically reassess the scope, delivery strategy, or available options for the LOTE, nor did it present alternatives or advise government of the risks in a timely way. In May 2026, now, Defence proposed and the government agreed to revise the delivery approach for the LOTE. This revised approach, blah, blah, blah. Now, an important point in this is it's the same group of people and the same agencies, the Australian Submarine Agency, Defence itself, the RAN and ASC, which I remind everyone is owned by the Department of Finance but completely controlled by Defence. It's this same group that are managing AUKUS Pillar One. How is it possible for the government, let alone the community at large, to have any faith in the ability of this group to come to rational decisions and undertake clear analysis when they have failed so openly and now so catastrophically when it comes to keeping the Collins submarines in service? I'll let you ponder that one. Now, in the remaining time, I'll just canter through some more strange things. President Donald Trump, again, briefly, says that he is going to try and make progress on this matter of arms sales to Taiwan by giving the Taiwanese president a quick phone call. That is something that would really enrage Beijing. Don't know whether it's going to happen. I also note how time flies, because in between now and the last time we spoke, President Vladimir Putin has also visited Beijing for a follow-up summit with President Xi. He was treated with the same pomp and circumstance as Donald Trump. That meeting appears to have had a number of far more concrete outcomes than the US visit. So that's just another strange dynamic to note. Ukraine. There's a lot happening there. And again, hopefully I'll have time in a future episode to really focus on that, because it has profound consequences for Australian defence planning. Drones have totally changed the nature of warfare. This receives almost no coverage in Australia, but Ukraine is now killing Russian soldiers at a greater rate than they can be replaced. Russian casualties are up to about 35,000 a month. 35,000 a month. These losses are just unsustainable. As well as that, Ukraine has been striking at Russia's oil infrastructure and has been making small but significant territorial gains on the battlefield. This means that Russian meat grinder tactics, which they've been using since 2023, are just not going to work. The military bargain that they had, was that they would sacrifice enormous numbers of troops if they could gain 100 meters here, 200 meters there. The level of casualties that they are suffering is something that even Russia cannot continue to tolerate indefinitely. Also, the Russian economy is starting to suffer a bit. Speaking of drones, US aircraft losses from attacks on Iran, and I'd have to say there's been a substantial cover-up on exactly what's been going on, but I noticed that 42 aircraft have been destroyed or badly damaged. These include 4 F-15E Strike Eagle fighters, 1 F-35 Lightning, badly damaged, 1 A-10 Thunderbolt ground attack aircraft, 7 KC-135 Stratotanker refuelers, 1 E-3 Sentry AWAC surveillance aircraft, 2 MC-130J Commando aircraft, 1 HH-60W Jolly Green Giant rescue helicopter, 24 MQ-9 Reaper drones, and 1 MQ-4C Triton surveillance drones. It's the drones I'll focus on. In other words, 25 of the 42 aircraft lost were uncrewed, and all but one of those was an MQ-9 Predator, which, by the way, I still firmly believe Australia should have ordered back in 2020 or 2021. Now, that relatively high number of losses of MQ-9s, in my opinion, is not a negative reflection on the aircraft. It's a reflection on the missions that they have been performing, saving the lives of aircrew. What do? You arm these things with laser-guided bombs and Hellfire missiles, and you fly them at enemy missile batteries, and the enemy has no choice to fire back, trying to destroy them first, revealing their location, expending missiles, and making life much, much easier for crewed aircraft. And by the way, on that theme of losses, we still aren't being told the truth about US bases in the region, with almost all of them having been hit and damaged to various extents by Iranian drones and missiles. I remind all listeners again that this was a war of choice when, on the 28th of February, Donald Trump gave in to Israeli pressure and launched a completely unnecessary attack. And I'm almost out of time. Speaking of Israel, I was disgusted by Israel's treatment of protesters, including 11 Australians. It doesn't compare with the continuing destruction of southern Lebanon using tactics honed in Gaza, but Israel is further damaging its international reputation, and I fear there will be medium short-term consequences as disillusioned younger generations enter politics around the world. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
That's today's Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.